Hello and thanks for joining us. This is The World Now. We begin in Europe, where European leaders are gathering in France for an emergency summit on Ukraine. And that's after the Trump administration announced it was opening talks with Russia on ending the war without a European presence. UK leader Keir Starmer said the meeting in Paris was a once-in-a-generation moment for national security, following Washington's bombshell announcement that has sparked concern in Kyiv and across Europe that Ukrainian and European leaders will be frozen out of peace negotiations. In recent days, US President Donald Trump and his top officials have upended what had largely been a united front between Washington and his European NATO allies on supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion, which is nearing its third anniversary. Trump's posture towards Russian President Vladimir Putin and comments from US officials on Ukraine and NATO has raised anxieties in Europe that Washington's vision for a swift end to the war would allow for key concessions to Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz are traveling to Saudi Arabia for the preliminary Ukraine talks, which is set to begin tomorrow. Now, joining me live to discuss hopes for the opening talks in Paris is Global Affairs analyst Collins Iweke. He joins me from Belgium. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me, Precious.
So I want to get your reaction to this statement coming from the U.S. Trump's administration. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has explained it. He framed the talks with Russia as the first steps into what he called to determine whether Russia is serious about ending the war in Ukraine. And he also said that, look, pending how the negotiations progress, then Europe will be brought in. But, I mean, what do you make of that?
What I make of that is that there is some intentionality on the part of Trump, in this case through his foreign secretary, to be ambiguous, to actually send mixed messages, because, I mean, what we can glean from the statements released so far, but also the, the moves and the body languages, I mean, in terms of the unspoken words, is that even Donald Trump himself doesn't quite know what is going to do with Ukraine and what is going to do with Russia. And so, obviously, while he's buying time to test the water on the part of Putin, by, having a direct talk with him, 1 hour telephone call, and then sampling opinions within Europe, because he has actually sent them, a questionnaire to fill out, questions around, for instance, who is ready to send troops to Ukraine, who is ready to contribute, more money, and so on and so forth. With all of these, not knowing what he's going to do himself, he's actually testing the water, and one can only expect that, over the coming days, maybe a week, we will begin to get more coherence from the Trump administration and Europe on its own with the summit, defense summit that is taking place in France today. They are also actually getting themselves prepared for any eventuality. So the summary of it all, Precious, is that we are looking at preliminary conversations from different sides, trying to, get their positions set in lieu of the actual conversations and negotiations that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks.
But where does this leave European leaders? Is there any window of opportunity here for Europe to guarantee Ukraine's security?
No, it doesn't make things easier for Europe. But I need to make one point very clear here. The likes of Emmanuel Macron, that has indeed become, an unmissable heavyweight in the European side of all of these negotiations, have always maintained that it is in Europe's best interest to untangle itself, particularly on defense matters, just like France, as a nation state, has done from the United States. Now, that conversation continues, in France today in the defense summit that they are having. Now, let's also bear in mind that not all European leaders are attending the summit, but the key figures are going to be there, and the essence is to actually bring to the table those that are key to the peace in Ukraine. Now, whether or not Europe is invited to the table, Europe will definitely have its own plan. And I believe that the most critical for Europe at this point, which is very strategic as well, is to look for those elements in all of these webs that solidifies Europe's position and makes them an inevitable partner in the negotiations going forward. And on that basis, an envoy could be sent to the US to actually get Trump to understand that he can't do this without Europe.
And it's interesting you mentioned, the fact that France is taking a lead role in terms of war efforts in Ukraine. And that's because Germany has been really cautious when it comes to its contributions to this war. In fact, most times it has needed a nudge to even contribute in terms of weapons. So when you hear the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that he's ready to and willing to put British troops on ground in Ukraine to enforce a peace deal if necessary, can he persuade other European leaders to make that kind of commitment?
I believe he can. And for your information, Precious, just this morning, the leader of the CDU, which is actually the party that is poised to win the most seats in parliament in the upcoming election, and indeed will deliver the political leader, the Chancellor of France, has actually said that Germany will send troops to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force when a ceasefire has been agreed. Now, it is also part of what Donald Trump is actually getting Europeans to do. So quite a number of key European countries have committed to actually sending troops to Ukraine when it comes to when a ceasefire has been achieved, to actually preserve the peace. So, based on the mixed messages, one could read or perceive some, frustration, but as a matter of fact, Europe is actually getting itself ready and set to for the next chapter in this whole history.
Frustration and shock indeed. We understand that the communique will not be issued at the end of that informal meeting as the summit, as they call it. But we'll see how Europe responds to some of these policies and decisions coming from the Trump administration. That negotiation will start tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time, as always. Global Affairs Analyst Akonis Oweke, always a pleasure to have you on.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you, Precious, for having me.